Good afternoon to everybody. It's always a pleasure to talk, particularly for an Italian. And I'm telling so in order that you have immediately understood by my accent, very strong Italian accent, that I am Italian by origin, though I have been now since 75 in this country, just simply because I got married with a Belgian girl. This was the best choice I could do in my life, and I still believe that this is so. I'm going to talk, have 4 hours with you. I hope that they will be useful to you, and particularly also useful to me if you take part in the debate, because what I'm going to say to you, I know it, so it's rather boring to me to repeat what already I know, but I don't know what you think about water, and this would be the added value to me if you make me the honor to participate in the debate. I hope that I will not be obliged to do just a monologue. Water is something that is in our mind. Water is not just a molecule. Water is the way how we see life. There is no really definition of water, as there is no definition of anything. It depends on our visions. It depends on our manner to relate ourselves with life. This is why there are many, many ways to look at water. And this is why there are many, many interests, different interests related to water, because a relation to water is life. And we have a lot of interests, different, political, ethnological, economic, culture. And water is never a field of peaceful relations. Not because human nature is bad, but because our relations with nature is a relation between ourselves. And our relations between ourselves are always peaceful, conflictual, moderate, violent, calm, just, unjust. So what I would like to submit to your attention this afternoon is to what extent our societies have shown a degree of wisdom with regard to a reality of life which by definition is not necessarily oriented by wisdom. Talking about water, we talk about societies. Talking about water, we talk about precisely intelligence of society, the intelligence of societies to be able and to wish to live together. And this is the object of my afternoon session with you. Is water showing that our societies are able and are willing to live together? I will first try to position water in a kind of a narrative of the last 50 years. And I will arrive in this first part to show that our societies have not been very wise. In the second part of my intervention, I shall try to analyze the consequences and the effects of this lack of wisdom, or let's say, very reduced level of wisdom of our societies. And in the third part, I will try to assess possible scenarios of development in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And my objective, analytical objective, will be to try to see whether there are reasons to hope in the sense of imagining that wisdom will come with us, will be in our houses, will be in our cities, will be in our nations, will be on our planet. A particular attention in this third part will be given, as I am European, and as you are studying in Europe, to the European water policy. And I would like to anticipate from now the motion that I would put to your attention is the European Union is far from being wise. The European Union is not a good example of how water and the relation between human beings through water should be organized, defined, implemented. And since we are closer to Christmas and the New Year's, by the way, I shall try in my conclusion to show that there is still hope independently of the European Union and independent of many other major worldwide players. So let's begin with the first part, the kind of retrospective narrative. I would say that since the beginning of the 70s, water, with particular exception of some places, water was a part of daily life. People were aware of the problems of water. In some countries, nobody was aware of the water problems. Water was part of life. Lacking of water, access to water, droughts, floods were part of life. And at an international level, the international community didn't show a particular sense of water. Water was not in the agenda of the international relations. At that time, water was in the agenda only in the situation of crisis. Floods, big, huge floods, or droughts. But was not ordinary matter. It was an item of the political international relations, with the exception again of water wars or conflicts on the use of transnational water rivers or transnational basins. The water issue came in the international agenda in association with the poverty and the development stage issue. As you know, after the decolonization, the development paradigm, which meant that everybody should follow the course of development of the developed so-called countries. The paradigm of development was that we were developed, the rest of the world ought to become as us. In connection with this development paradigm and the awareness of the hiatus, the divide, the enormous divide between the developed and the not developed, considered to be the poor people, in connection with the poor people who had to become rich, in connection with the poor people who were considered undeveloped, that they ought to become developed, the water issue came in the agenda. And when in 1974, the international community for the first time decided to say, let's have a big global-oriented program for development. The objective of the eradication of poverty was on top of the development strategy, and the idea was to eradicate poverty in the year 2000. And the agreement was that if the rich country allocated 0.7% of their GNP during 25 years, economically speaking and financially speaking, poverty would have been eradicated. In order to be precise, by poverty was meant the situation of people who living with less than $2 per day as purchasing power were considered poor those people who had less than $2 per day per capita as income. And the objective was the eradication of poverty by 2000, which meant that if the per capita average income at world level on a country was $2 plus 10 cents, poverty would have been eradicated. Statistically speaking, since this was the measurement of the target to be achieved by 2000. And water was part of the poverty issue because as not as was accepted, but as was evident, those who had no access to water or to sanitation were those who were poor. It's because we are poor that we have no access to water, to health, to food, etc. It's not because you lack of water. You don't lack food. You don't lack infrastructures very often. It's because you are poor. And then maybe you can have lack of access to infrastructure, etc., etc. So, in 1974, the idea was launched that 2000 eradication of poverty, therefore water was one, give access to water to everybody was part of the target. And in particular, after the first major World Water Conference in Rio del Plata in 1977, when the United Nations decided to have the first intergovernmental global conference on water issues, in 1977, the international community decided to launch the first, at that time it was not the first, but the international decade for water access to everybody. And the decade was 1981-1991. The objective being that in 1991, before the target of 2000, the eradication of poverty, all those people had no access to drinkable water, only, had access to drinkable water by 91. And huge programs, which was huge promises, were announced in order to achieve the target of eliminating the fact that billions of people had no access to drinkable water. This is the context of the first part of the narrative. So, in principle, if you were living in 74, in Zambia, or in Thailandia, or in Siberia, or in Mexico City, you knew that the international community was very sensitive to all issues of water poverty, and the international community showed that they were aware and that they were ready to do the maximum, in particular 0.7% of their wealth, to be allocated to assist, to help the world in development to achieve the eradication of poverty, which would have meant, even if the objective of 91 was not attained, would have meant that at least at 2000, the access to water for all would have been a target achieved. So, in 74, this was the atmosphere. And everybody was in motion, everybody was active. Intergovernmental official aid, all non-governmental associations, US aid, Canada aid, UK aid, European aid, all churches, Catholic Church, Protestant Church, Muslim, everybody was there, even international global companies with charity business, with a lot of, everybody moved as a train, a big train, towards the objective of 2000. 91, 92, there were still, officially speaking, 2 billion people without access to drinkable water, and more than 2 billion without access to sanitation. And in 2000, there were 2.8 billion people poor. So unfortunately, it became evident that all fantastic goals, objectives set by the international community in the spirit of the development paradigm wave of the new society, new international economy, to build up on the development paradigm according to the Western society model, failed. Of course, this does not mean that nothing was done. This does not mean that a lot of social groups in many countries got an improvement of their situation. In particular, also, this does not mean that we must discount the impact of demographic growth. Demography certainly played an important role. The more population, it's very difficult. Think the Chinese. Even today, Chinese have to deal with 3 billion people, 1.3 billion people. It's not easy to provide water in a centralized manner in 50 years to hundreds of millions of people every year being there. However, when the international community set up the plans, they knew it. We cannot say that they discovered in 2000 that population was increasing. They didn't discover that weakness were there. They knew. If we plan now an objective up to 2030, we know there will be more population, there will be big problems, conflicts, political difficulties, financial issues, etc., etc. So they knew. If they set up, nevertheless, the goals, meant that they internalize the difficulties, they internalize the factors, the demographic factors, they internalize the deep political conflicts, they internalize the financial troubles. So what could we say about this first retrospective narrative? To be short, my idea, which certainly is subject to controversy, my idea is that all stories about the eradication of poverty, development policies, de facto the leading and ruling classes of the Western societies, in complicity with the very narrow elites of the so-called developing or aided countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, they didn't want to eradicate poverty. They didn't want really to change the world in order to guarantee the universal application of the idea of development, which didn't mean de facto the economic growth, the GNP rate of growth. Development meant a dignity, a society with dignity for everybody. They didn't want it. Even we can say that they didn't succeed to achieve the eradication of poverty. They didn't succeed in reducing the gap between the developed and the non-developed countries because they did, and they operate with different objectives. They implemented policies that were contrary to the objectives of the eradication of poverty or the reducing the divide, the development. And we know this since mid-70s. Even when they started to propose the eradication of poverty, they initiated policies that were favorable to factors that would have generated increased impoverishment of people. They operated at two levels. The formal rhetoric level, the effective, real, substantial level. And the two things went on together. And we know the results. The real, effective, substantial policies won. The formal rhetoric objectives lost. Because it couldn't be otherwise. And this means that I don't need to you, certainly you have been taught many times about the development policies, and their structural adjustment policies are the very emblematic example of the asynchrony between the objective of eradication of poverty and the real policies. The structural adjustment policies were in favor of impoverishment of those who couldn't adjust to the so-called structure of the rich people. if you cannot be competitive in the logic of structural adjustment policy, you cannot open the markets because you don't have the same market of our development. You are loser at the origin, by definition. This led our societies to a major breakthrough at the beginning of the 90s. And here starts the water story, which are we now living with. In 92, as you know, was organized the first World Summit on Environment and Development, where, officially speaking, the culture of the world established a narrow connection between development and environment. It was the first time.